Hi everybody, it's Barry Harding Rathbone here. Welcome to my latest vlog on Spirit Shack TV. Sorry that I didn't put up a vlog last night, but as you may have noticed from comments elsewhere, John and I have had the most vile bug over the last few days, so we've sort of been rather stumped in our tracks. Just been watching a program over here in the UK that our American and Canadian cousins may know more readily as Judge Judy. Well, we have a different judge over here, a good friend of John and mine by the name of Robert Rinder, who's a very high-flying barrister. In fact, so high-flying sometimes he enters the stratosphere with the work he does for the British government and in his private practice as a barrister. But he's not only incredibly good at what he does, he's also incredibly amusing. So, along with Judith Scheinlin, he's producing an excellent series of courtroom hearings. Sorry if you hear a noise in the background. In a minute the dogs are just coming to bed and they do sleep in the lounge here in their beds, so apologies for the noise if you hear it. We've just watched one of his new series, and they could go to bed please guys. The case centred on a very sad and tragic situation. A young mother with two boys whose partner and their father had died at the age of, I think it was 32, from drug-related condition. His brother had agreed in principle to pay half the cost of the funeral, but had, for one reason or another, held back from making the payment, so she was suing him for the balance of the costs of the case. But needless to say, without going into it in great detail, there was a lot of animosity between him and her. He felt that she had posted things on social media that had a detrimental effect on his business and had caused him personal and professional damage, and so he felt he didn't have to pay. And Rob Rinder, the judge, in his usual no-nonsense, blunt fashion, had pointed out that would that be what his late brother would want to see to be the last action of his brother and his partner after his death. And it got me thinking, as a former funeral director and the son and the grandson of a funeral director from a private family firm in the Midlands, and also as a minister, somebody who undertakes an awful lot of funerals, or has done in the past. I'm going through a bit of a fallow phase at the moment, but I'm quite happy with that because I've got this channel which takes up more time, and so I don't really have time to conduct funerals. I have seen on many occasions the raw sadness, the pain and the bitterness that a bereavement can cause, and particularly where family are concerned. Now, in this particular case, through Rob's very tactful and no-nonsense way of dealing with it, he managed to start the healing process between the widow of the deceased and his brother. Although it's going to take a lot longer than just a 20-minute segue on a commercial TV station for that to actually be fully complete and healed. But it made me think about the amount of times I have seen otherwise very loving and very united families and relations being sorely tested following the unexpected death of somebody very young. In this case, the young man who died was only 32 years of age, as I believe I just said, and it no doubt had an effect on the family and upon his children, and upon the two people involved in this court case. Bereavement takes many different forms. There's two traditional ways. There's the fight or flight response that we see, where people either just knuckle down and get on with it, or they run screaming to the hills. Or there's the autopilot way, which is very much what happened to or with my own mum when my dad passed away very unexpectedly just prior to retirement, after years and years and decades of solid, hard graft, both as a funeral director and then later as a hotelier, and after that a corner shopkeeper, doing everything he could to put food on the table and electricity in the meter and central heating and doing all the things that a father and a husband traditionally is expected to do. Although that's not always the case. We know there are non-traditional families much more often today than there are the traditional nuclear families. But my mum went into autopilot. In fact, the night he passed away, my then partner and I had been round there. We'd literally had my grandmother, his mother's funeral service not 6-7 hours before, which I'd conducted as a minister. We'd had the wake, and then when everybody had gone, my then partner Eric and I sat with mum and dad, and we remembered stories of the past, of the happy times with grandma and the fun girl that she was. And she was full of life right up until very nearly the end, when unfortunately her mind gave way to dementia, that utterly evil and sadistic condition that doesn't only hurt or upset the person who develops it, but also has a really negative effect on those who are left to support and be there for the person suffering it, because it's as if you have two deaths. Obviously there's the physical death at the end of their life, but prior to that it's almost as if you're bereaved a first time by losing that personality and that person, and they become a shell of the former selves. And it can be very hard to deal with, as bereavement in a whole can be to deal with. After a while we left and went home, and I was having a shower and the phone went, and I heard my former partner then call out to me saying, "Your mum's on the phone, she can't start your dad's heart." Anyway, we raced over there to another part of Bournemouth from where we were living, and although between us we tried to keep his heart going, and then the paramedics arrived, it was very obvious that he had gone, he'd left us. Having a spiritualist faith helps, certainly, because I knew at the time, without any shadow of a doubt, that my dad still lived in a different place. And as I've often said when I've conducted funerals, all that had happened was he'd taken off an overcoat that no longer fitted him or was any use to him, and the overcoat, of course, being his physical body. And that gave me and my mum and people at the funeral afterwards, because I conducted my own dad's funeral 10 days later myself, and it helped bring a sense of peace and understanding. But nevertheless, there was still the arguments, there was still the disagreements, the rows, and the sense of personal loss that other people just couldn't accept, and felt that perhaps I was being selfish in as much as I dealt with it so easily. I want to tell you, even for the most die-hard spiritualist, or the die-hard person of faith who believes that they will see their loved ones once again in the future, there is still very much a sense of loss. There is very much a sense of hurt and bereavement. What I want to get across to people today is that irrespective of your faith, irrespective of your beliefs, irrespective of the absolute cast iron knowledge that you have that life goes on beyond death, you still need to permit yourself the opportunity to grieve. It's a natural human process, and it is something whereby we can permutate and think upon the person whose physical presence we no longer have. We can recall to mind the wonderful things they taught us, they showed us, or they shared with us, just by the very fact that they were involved in our lives for a short time or for a long time. And to rejoice in that. But there are no set rules about death, per se, or bereavement. Just because somebody has an understanding that guarantees that life continues beyond death, and indeed, as has happened on so many occasions in spiritualist traditions, where the people concerned have already received, in between the physical moment of death and the funeral service where we officially say goodbye, they have already received a message from their loved one, whose funeral they're going to take part in maybe a few days later, whereby they get that personal message of communication that they continue to exist. It still doesn't mean that that person should not be allowed the opportunity to grieve in just the same way as we all do. There's no hard and fast rule, my friends. Just because somebody has died doesn't mean we have to simply just get a stiff upper lip and a rod of iron down our back and carry on as if nothing had happened. We're still going to miss that person. But however our faith is, whatever our understanding of death is, allow yourself the privilege to grieve as is most appropriate to you. Don't let anybody tell you there's a set amount of time and then you must just simply put it to bed and carry on. Because what suits one person may not suit another. And with the fact that so many people die every single day, and I'm thinking particularly at the moment about the poor people of Haiti and the Caribbean and now the Floridian mainland in America, where they're being so viciously battered by Hurricane Matthew, which is just about to join forces with Hurricane Nicole. I know that Nicole Scherzinger is a strong singer, but I never knew she was a hurricane that could devastate islands and nation states. Sorry, slight joke there, poor taste. There are going to be more deaths. There are going to be more hardships and more suffering for the people there. All I would say to those people who are left losing their loved ones, take your time. Allow yourself the privilege of remembering the person you have lost. Give thanks to God that you've got to share in their journey for a short time, a medium time, or a long time. And celebrate their lives. Celebrate the way in which they impacted upon you and upon the community in which they lived in. And until you meet again, always hold them close to your heart. May God bless you in the way you perceive God, in the way you perceive the blessing. And may those who do pass as a result of this awful natural phenomena pass quickly, peacefully, and in the sure and certain knowledge that they will be received into eternal joy in the summer lands above this one. And until we meet again, I wish you God's blessing, and Namaste.